A special thank you for that gracious introduction, and a warm welcome to our visitors, especially part of my wonderful volunteer group from the Bellamy Mansion. We have several of our tour guides here this evening. If you have not been to a tour of the Bellamy, I highly encourage you to come, and these gentlemen are emblematic of the talent that we have showing you through the halls of that beautiful home. So, my name is Christina Grazer. I moved to this area about 8 years ago. I've always had an interest in history, but when I came to Wilmington, it just became a whole different ball game. Being surrounded by all the history in this area really ignited a passion in my heart. And the story of William Benjamin Gould is one that truly sent me over the top. And that being said, with your kind permission, I'd like to take you back in time to September 21st, 1862. Just picture in your mind Wilmington in that year. The skies over Wilmington are dark as the mood of the town. There's a sense of panic, fear, anxiety, and despair hanging in the atmosphere because the dreaded yellow fever plague has arrived. And as a result, almost 6,000 of our citizens in Wilmington have fled the area. That's roughly half of our population. And of those remaining in town, many are very, very sick. Years later, in his memoir, a young John Bellamy Jr. wrote, "I recollect well having stood on the porch of our home on Market and Fifth Streets, watching the wagons, loads of corpses hanging off the back, going right past our home." That was written by an 8-year-old boy. His family left shortly after that, evacuated Wilmington, and went across the river to what is now the area of Brunswick Forest. That's where the Bellamy family had a produce plantation. So it was in this kind of setting that a 24-year-old, William Benjamin Gould, made a decision that would change the course of his life. The onset of the yellow fever epidemic presented him with the opportunity he had been waiting for, because now Wilmington was a ghost town, a city of silence and gloom. The streets were deserted, and William observed that most of the slave patrol units had abandoned their posts. On that dark, dreary September night, the heavens opened up and a heavy rain ensued. Anybody who was left on the streets was now scurrying for shelter, including members of the slave patrol. If they didn't have a home to go into, they ducked into the buildings. So in that arena of deserted streets, William Gould decided that his moment had arrived, and it was time to put into place a plan that he had formulated with 14 other slaves. He bounded up the stairs to his front door of his residence that was located on Chestnut Street between 3rd and 4th Street. And incidentally, that is now the site of the Thalian Hall parking lot. Yes, he lived in a house in town. Urban slaves sometimes had the opportunity to do that. And he shared this home with 7 other roommates. And he went bounding through that front door saying, "It's time to go. It's time to go. The year of Jubilee is here. Come on, come on." His roommates got up, quickly gathered a few possessions. They leaned out the front door, and off they went. They quickly made their way to the foot of Orange Street, where they rendezvoused with the other 14 slaves who had gathered in the dark in the pouring rain. They slipped into 3 boats and began their long journey's night. They stayed close to shore so as to use the tree line as cover. Wordlessly, they cut their way through the darkness and rowed 28 nautical miles down the Cape Fear River. Silence was of utmost importance because there were telegraph operators stationed along the shoreline, and they were watching for runaway slaves. If anything suspicious was spotted, a message would promptly be sent to Fort Anderson to watch out for possible runaways. As they silently listened to the sound of the water splashing against the boat, I can't begin to imagine the fear and anxiety they felt, unrelenting through the night as they watched in the distance, praying to see the lights of a Union Navy blockade ship. Mile after mile, they kept rowing, passing Fort Anderson and Fort Fisher, and heading for the open ocean. Finally, on the morning of September 22nd, the very next day, they put up their sail as they neared Fort Caswell. And there, in the morning light, the USS Cambridge came into view. Ensign William Parker was standing on deck, and in his aboard ship log notes, he noted, "Saw a sail southwest and signaled to other vessels. At 10:30 a.m., picked up a boat with 8 contrabands from Wilmington, North Carolina. Took names and their masters. William B. Gould, owned by Nicholas Nixon." The remaining slaves were put on 2 other ships, and they, all of them then began their lives as free men. As Gould and his roommates were being given dry clothes and breakfast, another drama was unfolding simultaneously in Washington, D.C. As they were being welcomed aboard, at that very moment, President Lincoln was meeting with his cabinet and advising them that he had drafted a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation declaring that on January 1st, 1863, all slaves in the Confederacy would be free. Just think of that at the very exact moment. Wow, what a coincidence. So, what was the story behind this young man standing on deck of a Yankee ship who only the day before had been held in bondage? William Benjamin Gould was born on November 18th, 1837. His father, Alexander Gould, was a white man born in England who came to this country shortly after the War of 1812. His mother was Elizabeth Moore, a slave woman born in Wilmington. And incidentally, her master was also Nicholas Nixon. We have no records on the information about the early life of William Gould, but we do know from census records and ship logs that were found in the National Archives that Nicholas Nixon was indeed the largest slave owner in New Hanover County. He had a large plantation in the Porter's Neck area, and he was a peanut farmer who specialized in peanut production techniques. He was known all over the country. He was very successful, and in the antebellum period, 5/6 of the peanuts produced in America came from his plantation. So he was quite prosperous. As a youngster, William Gould probably played in those peanut fields and helped pick the crop when he was a little kid. But we have no documentation of how he earned his final trade. And his trade was that of a master plaster worker or mason. Because he was a highly skilled artisan, we can assume that he was hired out by Mr. Nixon and worked in many of the fine homes that were built in Wilmington, as evidenced by the magnificent plasterwork that you can see today at the Bellamy Mansion. However, the Bellamy House is the only known project directly attributed to William Gould. And the only way that we knew this fact is because William Gould had the audacity to autograph his work. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Now, On the 5th day out at sea, after climbing onto board the USS Cambridge, Gould approached the commander and asked if he could have a pencil and some paper to keep a diary. I'm sure that his request was met with surprise. You want a pencil and paper? Oh, okay. Well, they supplied him for the rest of his time on the Cambridge with pencil and paper each day, and he faithfully kept a diary. And it is the only surviving diary of a slave serving in the United States Navy. About 2 weeks after coming on board, William Gould, with his housemates, stood and raised their hand and pledged allegiance to Uncle Samuel, as William Gould referred to him. And they became part of the United States Navy, and William Gould was appointed to serve as a landsman. The Cambridge was stationed off the coast of North Carolina for a while, and about 4 months later, they were near the intercoastal waterway around the Porter's Neck area. And on that day, Gould wrote in his diary, "About 1 o'clock, we passed Rich Inlet, very close to shore. Took a good look at the place that I left in '62. What he was looking at was the Nixon plantation. Now picture this young man born and raised on this plantation where he had been kept in bondage, and now he was standing there in the uniform of a sailor in the United States Navy looking at the land that he used to live on, and now he was free. So I imagine it must have been overwhelming for him and a little difficult to put into words. Incidentally, that Nixon plantation is now a gated community with a golf course and a country club. The USS Cambridge that he was serving on was a heavy steamship outfitted as a gunboat with 2 powerful 8-inch rifle guns. She was a member of the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron, and her assignment was to blockade ports as she cruised off the coast of Virginia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. There's an entry in the diary dated January 14th, 1863, and it describes a firefight where the USS Columbia ran aground and radioed for assistance. There was a violent rainstorm going on, and during the 2-hour fight, there was a lot of shots being fired. Now, Gould had a very understated manner of expressing himself, a man of few words, and he got right to the point. In his diary, he describes this 2-hour fight and says, his only comment is, "Many a shot passed too close to us to be at all agreeable." I mean, this is what he writes after he's been having bullets whiz past his head and could have been killed or injured, but that was his comment on the situation. He was also known to have a very dry wit. But you've got to understand that when he wrote this diary, he knew it wouldn't be something private. He intended for others to be able to read it. So it's got chronicling of day-to-day activities such as the weather, some of their work tasks, and at times the narrative is a bit mundane. And there are descriptions of major confrontations, however, such as the capture of the Confederate steamship, the Georgia, that took place off the coast of Portugal. Yeah, not Portugal, America, Portugal, Europe. So when he was serving, though, at times he did reference letters, more than 60 letters that he wrote to his sweetheart, Cornelia. That's about as personal as he got. Well, 3 months after viewing his boyhood home from the deck of the Cambridge, his service suddenly came to an end because William Gould caught a case of measles, and it spread to other members of the crew. Believe it or not, he was hospitalized for 4.5 months with this measles. And the time that he was in the hospital is one of only 2 gaps in the diary. Otherwise, he was faithful about recording every day. While he was hospitalized, he became very close to his doctor, Dr. Fox. And towards the end of that 4.5 months, Dr. Fox was advised that he was being transferred to the U.S. Niagara. And Gould thought, I heard that ship is going to Europe. This would be a really good opportunity. So he pulled some strings and he got transferred to the USS Niagara so he could be with Dr. Fox. The Niagara was a steam frigate that spent time in Boston and New York, and on June 1st, 1864, it was assigned to watch over Confederate warships then fitting out in Europe. After 26 days, the Niagara reached her base at Antwerp in the Netherlands. So that was a pretty long journey, 26 days. And from there, they cruised the English Channel and the Bay of Biscay on the west coast of France, keeping an eye out for Confederate ships. The Niagara was also involved in skirmishes off the coast of Spain and Portugal. And it was when the ship was near Portugal that the crew received word of the surrender at Appomattox. And Gould, in his usual understated way, writes, although a piece of good news made no change in the plans of the commander as the war was not officially ended. Then on to the next subject. You'd think he'd be turning cartwheels, in writing, but no, that was his comment. So at that point, because it wasn't officially over yet, so the Niagara was ordered to track Confederate ships that might still be at large. And one of the ports that they called at was Queenstown, Ireland, which is now Cove. How many of you here are Irish? Okay, quite a few. I'm Irish on both sides. I can get an Irish passport if I want to. The diary entry that he wrote when they were in Coves on June 19th, 1865 says, a very fine harbor. We were immediately besieged by any number of boats in the true Irish hospitality style. And 3 days later, in the entry of June 22nd, he is still struck by the warmth of the welcome. And he states, they are continually passing around the ship in steamboats, cheering and waving and yelling and greeting us and singing hurrahs for the stars and stripes. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is proof positive that the Irish tradition of warm hospitality has been a way of life for many, many, many years. And William Gould witnessed firsthand Céad Míle Fáilte, which is Gaelic for 100,000 welcomes. So the image of William Gould standing proudly on deck as the Niagara passed the ports of Ireland, the white cliffs of Dover, and the French coast is very poignant. A 24-year-old Black man who grew up on a peanut farm in rural North Carolina, sailing the waters of Europe in service to his country. A remarkable picture. Now, this chapter in William Gould's life ended on September 29th, 1865, when he received an honorable discharge at the Charlestown Naval Shipyard near Boston, and thus concluded 3 years in deserted shell of itself, and the bell in the market house was silent, no longer ringing out the 9 o'clock curfew signal across the city that told all African Americans to get off the streets. The wharf, sort of once there had been bales and bales and bales of cotton, were now empty as the Confederate troops burned the cotton bales and before they left town, so the Yankee soldiers would not get possession of them. The workshops were silent, most shops were closed, and William had no desire at all to stay in Wilmington. And in a short time, he left for Nantucket, where he was going to begin the next chapter of his life. And I can tell you that William Gould closed the door on Wilmington entirely. His children never even knew he was from Wilmington. They had no idea that he had a life here. And his grandchildren and his great-great-grandchildren for a while didn't even know if he was a slave or a free man. He never, ever discussed this part of his life. The first chapter of his new life was a journey to Nantucket, where he married his sweetheart, Cornelia Reed. They had known each other in Wilmington as children, and she had been transported up north in 1858 by a Nantucket clergyman. Reverend James Crawford in Nantucket was related to Cornelia by marriage, and when he received word that she was about to be sold, he thought, I got to do something. He was worried she was going to be sold down south, maybe farther south where the conditions would be awful, more awful than they already were. So he started a fundraiser to raise money to buy her freedom. He needed $1,000. A lot of people in Nantucket gave money. He asked in certain circles in Wilmington for contributions. Only one family in town contributed, and that was a member of the Worth family. Have you ever heard of the C.W. Worth Bed and Breakfast on 3rd Street? That was the family that contributed to the fund to free Cornelia. And incidentally, when the Gould family comes to Wilmington, which they have been here several times for presentations and speeches and etc., when they come here, they all stay at the Worth House as a tribute to the ancestor there who helped buy Cornelia's freedom. Now the story continues after their wedding, which the Reverend Crawford officiated at. The story continues in Dedham, Massachusetts, a bedroom community of Boston. The Goulds went up there in 1871. That was about 9 years after William left Wilmington. They had 8 children, including 2 daughters, 6 sons, who all served in the military. The Goulds were one of only 2 Black families in Dedham, with the rest of the residents being mainly Irish and German immigrants. And William used his masonry skills that he acquired in Wilmington to great advantage, and he set up a shop as a plaster worker. If you want to see evidence of his skill level, all you have to do is walk into the Bellamy House parlors and your jaw will drop. And I'll show you a couple of pictures of that in a minute. Exquisite work, a true craftsman. And this was a precursor. The Bellamy's an example, a precursor of the work he was going to do up in Massachusetts. He had a reputation that grew quickly for his good work, and within a few years, he was awarded a very prime contract. That contract was the building of a new Roman Catholic church in town. So it was a big job. This sacred project was going to be big. So William Gould hired a crew to help him. One man couldn't do it. It would take forever. So he hired some other skilled workers, and they set going on it. Well, one day, William Gould was walking down the church aisle, and they were at a critical phase in the process of drying the plaster. And if the plaster wasn't dried properly, flaws would appear. And those flaws, though, would not manifest themselves till years later. So if you knew, I don't know if we waited long enough, you could get away with it. Nobody would know about it till years later. But William Gould, when he turned the corner in the church, he saw his crew had fallen asleep. And he was aghast. And he looked and, oh my gosh, this curing, oh my gosh, the timing's all off now. And he was heartsick. But being the honest character that he was, he went to the pastor and said, Reverend, I'm sorry. We're going to have to redo the plaster in this section. I don't think it cured right. My men fell asleep. I humbly apologize. I will assume responsibility for this. So he came in on his own time, after work, weekends, whatever it took. And he and some of his crew, they ripped out all the defective plaster and redid it. And he did it at his own expense. It almost put him into bankruptcy. But he was so honest. This is what he did. And that just magnified the wonderful reputation that he had, as you can imagine. And after that, he got contracts for quite a few public buildings and other schools in that area. So he became quite prosperous. And if you go to Dedham today, go to the Roman Catholic Church, St. Mary's, and look up, and you will see the examples of his incredible work. Just amazing. And by the way, you know, there's a lot of Irish Catholics in Massachusetts. Well, this church has the longest aisle in the whole Archdiocese of Boston. So you can only imagine how long it must be. And it's stunning. The pastor at the dedication ceremony, he was looking around him, and he remarked to one of the reporters that was there from the Boston newspaper, he said, "I'm overwhelmed. This church is almost too beautiful for ordinary use." And people have gone in thinking it's a cathedral. It's that grand. But in addition to running his plaster work, William Gould became extremely active in the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic. He joined in 1882. He became a post commander and actually held every office available in that organization. He was very much beloved and very active in his community. In fact, when Dedham was celebrating their 250th anniversary, they're one of the oldest towns in Massachusetts. At that anniversary celebration, it was a big, big deal, as you can imagine. William Gould was honored. He got a special honor as one of the leading citizens. And this is a guy who'd only lived there 14 years. And here he is being given this wonderful honor. He continued to lead a successful life in Dedham, and his accomplishments are all the more incredible because of his humble background and his hard work. He passed away from heart failure almost exactly 102 years ago. He passed away on May 25th, 1923, at the age of 85. But this is not quite the end of the story. When he died, he left all his worldly possessions to his brother Lawrence. And among the items was a box that held 2 books with compressed cardboard covers. And there was miscellaneous papers in the box, about 40 pages unbound, just thrown in this box. And Lawrence was on his way with some of this stuff. It gets overwhelming when you're an executor of a will. You can't deal with everything all at once. So he was on his way up to the attic with that box. And he put it up there, and I'll get to this later. He didn't really think about it. That box sat there for 35 years. Now, we probably would do the same thing today. I don't know about you, but when I have something, I don't know what to do with it, up to the attic it goes, okay? We're guilty of the same thing. How many of us have boxes of photographs? Oh, I'm going to put those in albums. How many years has it been, right? So when Uncle Lawrence passed away in 1958, he left his possessions to William Gould III. William Gould came to Dedham. He lived in New Jersey, and he took his son with him, William Gould IV. Let's go up to the attic. Let's see what's up there from Uncle Lawrence. They discovered the box that had been sitting there, covered with dust. When William Gould III looked through the pages, he was utterly shocked to find that it was a narrative of his namesake from the Civil War. he took the unbound pages and started trying to arrange them. And some of them had water spots on them, some were really difficult to read. So he looked at his son and said, you know, I think there's some pages missing from here. And they looked in the diary further and saw he was hospitalized with measles. And then they noticed that was part of the section missing. And then there were other pages that they couldn't find. And he said, we got to look through these other boxes, make sure there's not more. And they couldn't find anything else. And finally, some of the other family members came up to the attic and said, you've been up here all day. What's going on? We're hunting for these missing papers. Missing papers. Oh, well, there was a couple of boxes that had papers in them, and we threw them away. They never found this other missing section, which was several months. So unfortunately, they probably got put in the trash bin. But at that point, William Gould III looked at William Gould IV and said, you know what? We've got to make this our mission to get this put together and get this published. We didn't know any of this stuff. Let's do it. And William Gould IV said, yeah, Dad, that's a great idea. But William Gould was about to start law school. You don't engage in a major project when you're starting law school. You are studying law books night and day. We'll get to it later. He graduated, immediately got appointed professor of law at Stanford University. He's breaking in his new job. No time, no time. So again, years pass. And then during President Clinton's administration in 1994, William Gould IV was appointed the head of the National Labor Relations Board. He served a 4-year term. When you're in a job in DC, you don't have time to be going through boxes of papers. So again, project delayed. Well, in 1998, let's see, was it 1998? Yes, September 1998, William Gould received a phone call, and it was from Jonathan Nofke. He was the curator of the Bellamy Mansion, and he was on the phone and very excitedly said, Bill, you won't believe what we just found. We were taking plaster down in the family parlor, and we found a slab of plaster with the initials WBG. It's your great-great-grandfather's autograph. They were stunned. And William Gould IV said he almost dropped to his knees because he had been at the Bellamy House 18 months before that for a civil rights conference, and he had wandered around looking, and he noticed in the formal parlors this gorgeous plasterwork, and he said to himself, wow, that's beautiful. And he said, I got to take a picture of that for my wife. And he took pictures of it, not knowing his great-great-grandfather had done this work. Amazing. So that phone call spurred him to action. He said, we've got to do this project. We've got to get it taken care of now. So they concentrated on it. In 2002, the book Diary of a Contraband was published. It's available for sale, and if you want to get one here in town and support local business, go to the Bellamy House gift shop, and they will be happy to get you one. So, present day, November 13th, 2018, a silver medallion historical marker that you see on the highways was unveiled in front of the Bellamy Mansion. And among the dignitaries there for the ribbon cutting was William Gould IV himself and about 10 other family members that came from California, all the way from California, coast to coast for the ceremony. And yes, they stayed at the Worth House. That was followed by a speech in the front parlors. The parlors were crammed with people. I was standing like this, like a sardine. People jammed in there. We opened all the windows, people covering all the porches to listen and to see William Gould IV up there at the podium talking about what it was like to be in the Bellamy Mansion and witness the handiwork of his great-grandfather and talk about his emotions. It was chilling. It was just amazing, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And the final chapter in this remarkable story of William B. Gould is still being written. Memorial Day weekend 2023, just 2 years ago, a city park in Dedham, not far from the house where William Gould lived, it was renamed William B. Gould Park. And in addition to that, in homage to this remarkable man and leading citizen of Dedham, a statue of a seated, dignified William Gould was unveiled. William Gould IV spoke at that ceremony, and the unveiling was done by all of his great-great-grandchildren. And you might think, wow, it can't get any better than that. Well, it does, because in the summer of 2023, 30 members of Congress wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy requesting that a ship be named in Gould's honor. And just this past June, not even a year ago, the United States House of Representatives voted to direct the Navy to name a future commissioned ship for William B. Gould. This declaration is included in the National Defense Authorization Act. So, a lifetime beginning as a slave in Wilmington, North Carolina, and now ensuring his legacy as a ship in the United States Navy. It doesn't get better than that. So I'm going to close with this quote from William B. Gould in his diary, and it's his feelings upon hearing that the war was finally over. It's the diary entry dated April 15th, 1865. On my return on board, I heard the glad tidings that the stars and stripes had been planted over the capital of the Confederacy. While we honor the living soldiers who have done so much, we must not forget to whisper for fear of disturbing the glorious sleep of the many who have fallen, martyrs to the cause of right and equality. Thank you for your kind attention, ladies and gentlemen.